It was wonderful. Just one of the moments where there's no way they were getting out of it because it was a narrow track, and it turned out to be one of the Russian majors and his driver doing a naughty recce in a restricted area.
This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app so you don't miss out on any of the episodes. Keith Bailey joined the British Army at 16 in 1973. He was recruited into the Blues and Royals, part of the Household Cavalry, and served in West Germany as a gunner in Chieftain tanks. However, he was keen to serve in the Royal Military Police, particularly 19 Support Platoon, known as the White Mice. Their role was to track SOXMIS, the Soviet military mission in West Germany. SOXMIS operated under a 1946 agreement where Soviet, British, US and French agreed to an exchange of military mission groups to patrol the opposing side's then zones of occupation. The agreement continued to 1990, and needless to say, both sides bent the rules somewhat. Now, Cold War history is rapidly disappearing. However, a simple monthly donation will help keep this podcast on the air and continue to preserve these incredible stories. You'll get a sought-after Cold War Conversations coaster as a thank you, and you'll bask in the warm glow of knowing that you're helping to preserve Cold War history.
Hi, I'm Andrew, and I'm very proud to support Cold War Conversations with a small donation each month because Ian's put together such a brilliant range of interviews. If you do support the podcast, your wallet will be a tiny bit lighter, but your brain will be very, very thankful.
Just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate to see the options. If a financial contribution is not your cup of tea, then you can still help us by leaving written reviews wherever you listen to us, as well as sharing us on social media. It really helps us get new guests on the show. I'm delighted to welcome Keith Bailey, MBE, to our Cold War conversation.
I was in the Army Cadets for many years, and I always got a thing, and it got into my blood. In the Army Cadets, I might as well join the regular army and see the world, as many people think. And I did. I joined the army at 16 as a boy soldier. I went to the Guards Depot, and it was an interesting time to see how the army was around in 1973, which is a long time ago now. And from there, it just grew, and I spent the first 5 years with the Household Cavalry as a clanky tanky. I was with the Blues and Royals. They have two sides to them. They have the mounted squadron in London, and they have the armoured side, which was at that time was in Combermere Barracks, which is a mouthful, in Windsor. And then they moved from there in 1975 to Germany. So I spent most of my army career in Germany.
What vehicles were they using at that time?
When I joined in 73, we had Saladin, Saracens, and Ferret Scout cars that all wheeled. And then as we slowly drifted into the late 70s, mid and late 70s, we started to get the Scorpions, the Samaritans, and the Samsungs, and all the light armored tracked vehicles, and the Saladins, the Saracens, and Ferret Scout cars were slowly phased out. But they did keep the Ferret Scout car for an awful lot longer after the Saracens and Saladins left, because they were a great little recce vehicle. And then we were moved over from Windsor to Germany, a place called Detmold, where we moved on to the MBT, the main battle tank, which was then a Chieftain, and then later became the Challenger. I didn't experience the Challenger, but I did get all my tank trades on the Chieftain.
Oh, wow. Wow, yeah. I've heard quite challenges around the power unit.
Yeah, once the engines are running, they're fine. But if you turn them off and then try and start them again, then the engine seals used to burst, and then they used to spend more time off the road than on the road, which was a shame because overall they were a good tank. They just had a very poor quality engine, sadly.
I once did get inside a Chieftain, actually, at a tank museum in Norfolk, and I was surprised at the size of... I mean, the turret is quite roomy when it's compared to certainly a World War II tank.
Yeah, I would agree, but it's different when you're sat in the gunner's position, because that is very compact, and you've got the commander directly behind you. So if you make an error with your judgment when you're firing, you kind of had a size 10 around your neck at the same time. It's the loader and the driver that have all the space. Trust me.
So how did you end up in the Royal Military Police? Did you sort of see an application or an advert somewhere, or how did you end up with them?
There's a kind of stigma to joining the military police from the Household Cavalry, because the Blues and Royals and the Life Guards are the most senior regiments in the British Army, except Royal Horse Artillery when they're towing their guns, which is not that often. So I met a chap in Germany, a guy called Jock Johnston, really nice guy. I haven't spoken to him for an awful long time. And I think I was on exercise, and I thought, I think I could be a military policeman. I've spent 5 years with the cavalry. I know how a soldier thinks, and I think I could do that job. And it kind of grew from there. I discussed it with my wife, and she said, yeah, why not? So I applied to join the RMP, and I was knocked back several times by the regiment because it was seen unsuitable for a member of the household division to go down to a lower grade corps, whatever it would be, from literally position number 2 to position 25 within the army scales. So it was frowned upon. I was declined twice on application, and on the third time, I'd already spent several tours in Northern Ireland, and I said to my boss, which just happened to be the 2IC of the regiment at the time, I said, look, I really would like to go to the military police. He said, have you thought about this? I said, sir, I've been refused twice. I've been declined twice. I know for a third time you have to review my case. And so he did review the case, and he said to me, go to Northern Ireland, do your stint in Northern Ireland, come back, and if you still wish to go, I will push it forward for you. So I came back from Northern Ireland after a 4-month tour, and I said, sir, I still would like to go. And he moved, he honestly literally moved mountains, and within 6 months I was gone. I was at the RMP training centre, because in the cavalry, a lance corporal wears 2 tapes and a crown. So it looks very strange. The lance corporal normally has 1 tape. So it was a very strange, I became a very strange commodity to the RMP training centre to be a lance corporal with 2 tapes and a crown. And I confused many, many officers, because there were many things like traditions, like in any order of military dress, the Blues and Royals and the Life Guards can salute an officer. So as I was a lance corporal, and all the other chaps were all direct entrants from civistry, I was literally the only voluntary transfer. They call you VT. And I called up this squad to attention, and this officer walked past, a young officer, and he said, young man, we do not salute in an order of military dress. And I said, sir, it's a regimental custom. And then he said, what regiment are you? I said, the Blues and Royals. And he just ummed and said, never heard of you, but carry on. So I confused a lot of people for the period of from April 1980 until September, when I passed out of the RMP training centre as a lowly lance corporal with 1 stripe, but within 5 months I was promoted to corporal, which is great. So then I got 2 stripes without the crown.
And what attracted you to the RMP? Why did you want to transfer to them? Well,
when you've spent 5 years in a cavalry regiment, or in fact any regiment, which are either infantry or I'm going to be specific. I'm going to say infantry, and I'm going to say tanks, because once you've done all your infanteer skills, you are an infanteer, and you can do other courses, but you are still an infanteer. Once you are in a tank regiment, you become a tank driver, a gunner, a loader, operator, and you get all those skills. And when you've got all those skills, which in a tank regiment doesn't take long, you become what they call a crewman. Once you're a crewman, that is where you will always be. You're either crewman, or you're specialised in your drive, maybe an armoured vehicle, a smaller one, or something of that description. I was lucky. I mean, I was on Chieftain, but I was also on light armored vehicles, which was the Ferret for many years, and Land Rovers as well. But that was me. I had all the qualifications to be in the job I did. I was one of the best gunners in the squadron, which I thoroughly enjoyed being a gunner, even though I was stuck in a little dark hole most of the time. And I realised, hang on a second, I've got all these tank qualifications for the army. What good are they to me in Civvy Street? Am I going to walk down the road and is there going to be a tank at the side of the road broken down and I can turn around and say, I can drive a tank, I'll move it for you? But it's never going to happen. So having discussed it with my wife, I thought, I've got a brain. Let's use it as a tanky or an infanteer. You use your hands a lot more than you use your brain in many aspects because you do what you're told and you get on and you do the job. Whereas with the military police, yes, you use your hands, but you also use your brain a lot more. Suddenly you're learning judges' rules, or you're learning the Police and the Criminal Evidence Act. You're learning to deal with civilians who are dependents. You're learning to deal with soldiers, and dealing with soldiers as a soldier is one thing, but dealing with soldier as a military police, which always have a bad stigma being called monkeys and red caps and things. It became a point where I thought, well, I can do this. I can communicate with soldiers. I know how a soldier thinks. All I have to learn is the theory side, and it's not easy to learn the theory side, but I did. And as I say, I was in the RMP Training Centre from April 1980 until September 1980, where I had to learn all the judges' rules, and later became the Police and the Criminal Evidence Act, called PACE. So we were then interviewing people for crimes. We were arresting people. I arrested officers. I arrested NCOs, non-commissioned officers. I arrested soldiers. And it was all for good reason. There was never a bad reason behind it. It was never for because they were good people. They were arrested because they did something wrong, and that was my job, to enforce the law as a military police officer. And it's enjoyable. And because when you're with a tank, the job's the same day in, day out. You get dermatitis, you get skin issues. With the RMP, you just have issues with dealing with other people, so you learn how to communicate better. And suddenly, every day in my life, once I transferred, was different. I would go on patrol, I would drive different vehicles, I'd be crewed with different people, and you dealt with everyday incidents. It could be a traffic accident, it could be a suicide, it could be just a criminal damage, it could be a drunken soldier. My first case, which I'll tell you about because it is so funny, was I was just literally trained up as RMP. I came back to the Detmold where I was already originally posted from. And we went out on patrol, and I was in the back of the patrol car. And as we drove into town, there was this soldier came out of this nightclub. I think it was around about 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night. He was completely out of his head. He was gone. And he tried to get on this bike. Unfortunately, unbeknown to him, the bike was chained to the fence. So when he tried to pedal it, he went over the handlebars and smashed his face on the ground. No, he didn't do it once. He did it twice because he was so drunk. He just had no feelings. So therefore, that was my first case for arresting a soldier for being drunk in a public place, basically for attempted theft of a pedal cycle. And that was my first case. And it was, and then he didn't, the next morning he woke up from the prison cell and felt his face all smashed in and didn't know what he'd done. So, but it was still a crime in the eyes of the law. It was the way it is. Drunkenness in a public place and potentially trying to steal a bike is still a crime. So it goes from little minor things from that to go into a suicide of an 18-year-old, or go into a traffic accident where there are injuries or there are no injuries. Every day was different, and that's what I liked. And with the tankies, with the Blues and Royals, it was the same.
Yeah, no, I can understand that, because the image you have of the Royal, or some people's image of the Royal Military Police is, as you've described, sort of arresting drunken squaddies every evening. But effectively, the Royal Military Police was a police force for the entire army. So you're dealing with the whole range of different crimes that could be committed. So there's a lot of learning and a lot of rules that you've got to follow, I'm presuming.
You've got to learn the definitions of theft, assault, criminal damage, all these you have to learn, because the definitions have to be followed, because in the definitions you have to ask the questions appertaining to that definition. A person is guilty of theft if they dishonestly appropriate property belonging to another. So you have to, when you put in your questions, you say, well, did you know that when you took that cup you were stealing? Well, yeah, I suppose so. And they're the kind of answers you get. So therefore, you've covered that one already. So he dishonestly appropriated property. Did you know that property belonged to somebody else? Yeah, well, it was just laying around, so I took it. You've approved another point. So you have to prove all these points in your interview. And in the early days, the interviews were done, everything was done in writing. Later, they brought in recording devices, so it's got easier, but the paperwork hasn't got any easier. But yes, we were in Germany. We were real policemen and policewomen. We did a proper role as proper police officers, and we did it to the best of our ability. And we'd say we covered everything. And when it came to serious crime, we had our specialist unit, the Royal Military Police Special Investigation Branch, which was the equivalent to the CID. And they would take over serious incidents like rape or murder and stuff like that. And we had those cases. They happened in Germany. Luckily, not too often, but they did happen. And they were dealt with accordingly. And in certain circumstances in Germany, the British could take control or take responsibility of a serviceman, depending on the crime they committed. As time changed, and as we started to draw out in the 90s, the rules got a little bit tighter, and the Germans started to take on the control of police and the British forces in Germany. So it changed towards the end. But after the war in 1945, right up to the 90s, the military police had a lot of power. They had a lot of control, and they didn't abuse it. There were there's always going to be the odd individual. There's always one or two bad apples in every barrel, and no matter what regiment you go to, you'll find that. And overall, the people I work with are fantastic. We had our banter, we had our mess life, we just had great social activities and enjoyed the life. I mean, I spent 16 years in Germany. It's a big chunk of my life. My wife is German. I speak German. I have dual nationality now.
Yeah, and the RMP had quite a special role in West Berlin as well, didn't they?
They certainly did. They had control of the corridor, and they policed the Berlin Wall and all sorts. I mean, I wasn't lucky enough to serve in Berlin, but I had friends that did, and I often went to Helmstedt on the border there to just, that's as far as I ever went really on official in uniform. But my wife has actually visited Berlin during the Cold War more than I did. But it wasn't one of my postings. But I did get there just after the Berlin Wall came down. I went there. It was really, really very interesting to see what everyone else had experienced. Berlin's an incredible place. If you haven't been, you should go.
Oh, it's one of my favourite cities. I mean, I've been there probably about 10 times, and I managed to get there before the wall fell. So I've seen the contrasts as well. How did you first hear about 19 Support Platoon?
I used to be, when I was in Detmold with the RMP, I knew of them because they came to our police station quite often, or you could say RMP duty room. It's now a police station. And I've actually been out in their vehicles on patrol with these. They used to have these big white Ford consoles. I said, "What do you do?" And they said, "Oh, we police the Russians." I said, "Doing what?" And of course, I was completely naive. And, we'd been briefed about SOXMIS, but nobody ever saw one really. And if they did, it was on a very, very rare occasion. And of course, they explained to me, and they were very proud of the fact that they were driving these big white cars, and they'd been across to UK and gone across to Preston and done their civilian police advanced driving course, which they all did. They're all qualified, highly qualified drivers, all paid for by the MOD for the good and benefit of the British forces in Germany. And I thought, that'd be interesting. But then I got posted to Northern Ireland for 2 years, and of course you can't do anything in Northern Ireland. And from Northern Ireland, I anticipated going back to Germany, and I didn't. I actually went to Cyprus. So we spent 4 years away from Germany, and then went back. And this was pretty bizarre, really, because when I got posted back to Germany, I got posted to Bielefeld, and Bielefeld was a police post. And when I got there, I very quickly realised I was actually at the home of 19 Support Platoon, because they had half the building at the other end, and we had the other half for the police station. So I got to know them ins and outs. I got to know the warrant officer and the staff sergeants and other people. And I said to Leo, "How do I get in with you guys?" "You have to join the queue and get at the back because you're lowest of the low." So I put my name forward. And I was at the police station for a year, and they said, I got a knock off the warrant officer, a nice chap called Bernie Virgin, really nice guy. He said, "We're recruiting." we've had a lot of people not able to come and join us. Would you be interested? Absolutely. So the first thing I had to do was do what they called the British Army of the Rhine, the BAOR white mice course, white mice driving course. And I did a course with a guy called Mal Binns. He was a good friend of mine. He lives in Hull, and he took us out, a few of us. There was two RMP. He was RMP and one RAF chap. Done the course, and we did the course. It was over 4 weeks, driving all over Germany in the unmarked white mice vehicles, and it was great. And I got through that course, and then I joined the platoon. And they said, before you can go on any operational duties, you need to go across to Preston and do their advanced course now. And oh my gosh. So then they sent me across to Preston for a further 4 weeks to do their instructor's course, as did everybody else, including the warrant officer. Everybody did that course, and then came back. And then I was issued with a vehicle, and that was your vehicle that you would use to go out and do, as the white mice, SOXMIS duties, white mice, because we were white vehicles. And that's the way it was. We never had any livery down the side, just military police front and rear, and a blue light on the roof initially. 87, 88, and 89 we had 2.8 litre Ford Granadas, and they had extended fuel tanks, 160 litres of fuel, and a single blue light on the roof, and the usual same German sirens as the Germans had, which helped a lot, because the Germans react to those kind of sirens very, very quickly.
Those driving courses you were on, what were they teaching you? How to conduct a vehicle stop?
The exact same courses the police undertake to become police advanced drivers, and they have to learn the roadcraft, inwardly digest the roadcraft, and regurgitate it on a drive. So you would go out. There'll be three of you in the vehicle with an instructor, a civilian police instructor, and he would take you out in the vehicle. One would obviously drive, and you would have to drive and give a commentary, and the instructor would teach you, the observation, anticipation, planning and restraint, and all these kind of things, using the elements of the roadcraft, where you mirror, signal, maneuver, and all the kind of stuff that you have to do before you commit yourself to anything, like prior to an overtake. It's mirror. Is it clear? Signal. Can I signal safely? Can I check the mirror again? Is it safe to go? And you have to do all this, and it has to be fluid, and it has to be practiced. And with that, you become more proficient. And that was the whole course. So you would sit in a vehicle, behind the wheel of a vehicle, for about an hour, hour and a half, depending on the instructor's feelings towards you. And you would talk almost non-stop in many cases, to learn the skills that they need to partake up to you in the roadcraft. And you learn everything about corners, the types of bends, left, right, gradual acute. There's all sorts of stuff that you have to learn about the road and the highway code as well. And you have to go and sit on lectures, and people would give you lectures on stopping distances, braking distances, everything to do with being able to control your vehicle with car sympathy, driving with comfort, not being aggressive with the controls. Even as far as steering the vehicle, you would have your hands in a position on the wheel that you could steer with maximum control of the vehicle. How to have what we call car sympathy, so that we don't waste fuel. Everyone's comfortable when you drive, and you drive around bends at ridiculous speeds, and the instructor's going, "Come on!" He's going, "Come on!" And you're going, and you see the sweat start to develop on your forehead, and you think, yeah, this is scary. But they're amazing courses, and 4 weeks is a long time, but you come away a lot wiser.
We mentioned SOXMIS earlier. Can you just tell us why there were Soviet troops driving around West Germany?
After the Second World War, it was obviously the Second World War finished in 1945. In 1946, there was a decision made by the different countries, which was France, America, Russia, and Britain, that they would divide Germany, and that each would have a section and control it. In those sectors, you would have from the Roberts and the Malin Agreement, which is the agreement which tells them that their job is to basically gain intelligence lawfully and not go into restricted areas, but they did. And basically that was their job, to monitor the British, American and French and Russian forces appropriately. So we had BRICSMIS in the east, and Americans and French had the same. They had Soviet military mission, i.e. SOXMIS, in the west. and they would be in the British, the French, and the American sectors, and they would be policed by the Americans in the American sector, the Brits in the British sector, and so forth. That's the way it went. And they would have anything from 5 to 8 or 8 vehicles, from whether it be 4x4 or just general Opel Asconas or Opel Commodore. They have a mixture of vehicles, some with trailers and mobile transit vans and stuff like that. And their job was to go out and patrol and gain intelligence on what was going on with the British forces, and the same for our people, which were doing the same in the east. And our job as White Mice we would be out in areas, because we had temporary restricted areas, which were imposed during exercise periods, which means they were not supposed to go into those areas. And we would have permanently restricted areas. Now, permanently restricted areas were where any military installation was, whether it was British, Dutch. If they were in the British zone, those areas were completely restricted to the Russians. But clearly they did go into those areas, and clearly they did disappear into woods at night, and they quite often disappeared from our radar. But when they were in specific areas and they were caught, or not so much caught, but they were seen, our job was to go out and move them from the area. And if they were caught in a restricted area, 9 times out of 10, there would be a vehicle front and a vehicle behind them from the Allies, and a blanket would be put over the top of the vehicle so the Russians couldn't see what was going on around them, because obviously their job was to gain intelligence from what was going on around these military installations. And then they would call us, and we would go out, and they would only ever surrender their documents to the British military police in the British sector. So if they were stopped by the German police, they would not talk to the German police. They would not engage with the German police in any form whatsoever. They would just sit there with their arms crossed and just put a little, I think it was a label they had called the British military police. And then they would call us out, and we had complete jurisdiction over the Soviets during the Cold War. And then if they were in a restricted area and they'd been detained either by us or by other agencies, then we would then go across, obtain their identities, which they would surrender to us. Then we'd go back to our patrol car, and we had communications. The radios weren't brilliant, but we had a thing called Tech Aid, which was like a phone, an old mobile phone, which was a huge thing, but it fitted into the vehicle. And we would call back to our base, which was Zero Delta in Bielefeld, or we would call directly to the SOXMIS liaison officer, and he was in Hereford, and he would come out with his driver, and then he'd speak to the Russians, because he spoke fluent Russian, and they would get a slap on the wrist and told they shouldn't be in the area, and then they would be escorted out of the area, and a report would be submitted as to what happened and their attitude and so forth. But because it was such a political hot potato, whatever we did to the Russians in the West, it was reciprocated on our British colleagues in the East fivefold. So if we were aggressive towards them, then there's guaranteed something worse than nasty would occur to one of our vehicles over there. They would be rammed by another tracked vehicle, or they could be shot at, or they could be detained for no reason whatsoever. So it was all very much a political hot potato when you were dealing with the Russians. So you were very, very polite, and they would very rarely speak English to us. They would always speak German or Russian. Unfortunately, because I could speak German, they would talk to me and I would communicate with them, but obviously with moderate conversation, because we couldn't be seen to be fraternizing, as some people would point out. And then they would be taken away, and they'd go away on their merrily journey with a slapped wrist, and they'd come back and do it again in a few weeks. But that's the way it was, And then they would I'm sure we know they took pictures. We know they had a dead letterbox drops where they would leave certain things in certain places, and then someone in another vehicle, whether it be with Polish plates or whatever, would be in Germany, pick up these films and then take them on to the east, where they would slowly filter back into the system. But I know for a fact that our intelligence corps, that were 26 liaison, which were another bunch of lads that were out with unmarked vehicles, were quite hot and used to follow up on a lot of these things. And of course, the Soviets didn't know at the time that they were being monitored not just by us. We were the overt prevention. They were also covert, and they were out there just as much as we were, and they looked just as much as a normal civilian than anybody else. So we did a job, but I'm sure the Liaison Intelligence Corps did a great job in deterring them from getting a lot of material back to the east. I'm fairly sure of that. But we did what we were told. We chased them, we dealt with them, and sometimes it was busy, and sometimes you could sit around for days and nothing would happen. They wouldn't even come out the compound. So it was all different days.
Where was their compound? Was it in Hereford, the SOXMIS compound?
I believe they originally started in a place called, where is it, Bad Salzuflen or something like that, and then they moved to Bunda. And in Bunda, they had an enclosed compound. And inside that enclosed compound, they had their vehicles, they had their offices, and there were married couples in there. They brought their wives and their children across. They had education. They had everything. They even had access to the NAFI, which was down there, which was the Forces shopping centre. And they would go merrily to those places to buy stuff. And it was all organised by the British liaison officer, and he would, liaise with them on a regular basis, and they just were really, they were just there, and when they would go out in uniform. So they were always in uniform, never seen them in civilians. And the whole time I was there, I don't think they did have civilian clothing, but only time I saw that was when the last few days before they left the former West Germany to go back to the East.
Did they have even schools in that compound then for their kids, or were the kids taught locally?
I'm not 100% certain. I think they used to have classes within their compound. The teachers would come in, as far as I'm aware, and they would be taught like almost homeschooling, that kind of thing. Because they all had, not all, but many of them had children. But it must have been quite boring for them inside that compound. There can't have been much they could have done, because it wasn't a very big place at all. And the standards of the houses were okay, are probably better than what they got in Russia at that time. So they were treated well. They never wanted for anything, and they always got their vodka.
And how did they pay for stuff in the NAFI? Did they get some sort of allowance from the Soviets in hard currency, in Deutschmarks?
I'm fairly sure it was organised by the British liaison officer again, and they would have a certain amount of currency. There were Jews in the NAFI to buy their stuff, and it was all sorted anyway. And they were always pretty much escorted by somebody, so it wouldn't have been an issue. But they would be in uniform. I know that for a fact. So there was always allowances made.
When they left the compound at Bunda, was there always a white mice vehicle waiting outside to follow whatever vehicles left there? Or were you relying on sightings from British troops?
When you come into the old compound there was a camera and a little guard hut. But in that guard hut, it wasn't a person, but it was a camera. So every time a vehicle would come out of their compound, the camera would obviously activate and send a message to the control room, who would then inform us that car 54 or car 42 or car 41 has left the compound. And we never sat actually right outside the compound itself. We sat about 2 k's away, outside a place called a woodyard. It was an actual woodyard, a huge woodyard. And we would sit there. Sometimes there'd be one vehicle, sometimes there would be two, sometimes there'd be 4 or 5. The guy that owned the woodyard must have loved us, because he never got broken into, because we were there almost 24/7, all weeks and days and nights and all sorts. And we would sit there, and we'd be, you'd have your coffee, or you'd be eating, or you'd be just, one of you be wide awake, and the other one would be kind of napping with the seat semi-reclined, and you'd get on the radio, hello, all white mice call signs. This is 0 Delta. Car 41 has just left the compound. Now, they are instructed to come our way. They have to come past us. That's their instruction. But occasionally, instead of coming out the compound and going left, they would turn right and go out the back way. And sometimes that would happen. They would just disappear off the radar, and then they would get chastised for doing it. But they served their purpose. Nobody knows why they did it. Well, it's clearly they're up to no good, but they did it. But most of the time, 99% of the time, they would come past us, and we would be sitting there. And the moment that the vehicle drives past us, we would start our engines, or we'd have the engines running, and we'd just follow on behind. And that would be, we'd follow them through, and that would be it. We'd follow them until we were either told to drop, or they came back in again. And what they used to do, they would drive past with one vehicle, and they would see how many of ours are there. And we don't know. I didn't ever see it, but I'm fairly sure they had some kind of communications, because if there were 4 of our vehicles there, they would send out 5. they knowing full well that for every vehicle they sent out, we would follow. And then the 4 that we would follow, they'd go out, do a circuit, and come back in again to the compound. But the 5th one, which would be undetected as far as they were concerned, but they didn't realise, obviously, that the intelligence corps were out there, would go out and think that they've got a free hand and disappear and do their thing into Germany. And they did that every so often, especially during exercise periods where they wanted to gain more intelligence. They would send more vehicles out than we had at the wood yard. And they would then they would just go freely. But then we were reliant on the German locals and the British forces members and any other forces that were in West Germany where we were to inform us of any sightings. And there was a card. They all had these cards, which it's got a number on it. And it's on the back. It would say, if you see a SOXMIS vehicle, contact this number and inform us. And people used to call in. And we'd be out on the ground, and they would go back in, and we'd be sent somewhere else, depending on how many cars were out there. And then we would hear on the radio, the car is sighted at such and such a place, and we could be in Dortmund, and they could say we've got car 52. It's just been sighted at Hanover, so we would have to hightail it from Dortmund to Hanover. And we used to fly at ridiculous speeds. I mean, the Granadas used to do, I think, flat out around about 110, 120 miles an hour. And then you would be flat out all the way through, and just to get to where they were, so that you could pick them up if they were in the area and then get them out. And we do that nearly all the time. But it was cat and mouse. We used to hunt them and they used to hunt us. And it was not so much hunting us, but they used to try to lose us, I should say. But I'm sure they had the intelligence corps not far from where we were anyway, and we're fairly sure that on occasion we would be called into an area where a car had been sighted because the Int Corps had dropped them off, and they wanted us to carry on because they were now in a sort of friendlier zone, and they just wanted to let them know that we knew that they were there, kind of thing. And it was a cat and mouse. It was a game, and there were all 3 of us involved: the Soviets, the intelligence corps, and the white mice. And that's what we did. It was fun.
And how many vehicles did they have in that compound? What was their sort of like maximum disposition they could send out?
They could put out as many as 5 vehicles, really, properly manned. They had the capacity to do that, but they never really put any more out in one go than 5. That was the most I'd known. And I'd say, and if once they'd got rid of the white mice at the wood yard, then most of them would come back in again because they were just a distraction, and that's the way it would work. But not too often, but it did happen. So they had a free hand to go and disappear. And usually, you had 43. I think it's 43, and there were 2 Isuzu troopers, and they had 4x4 capabilities, so they're the ones that used to disappear into the forests areas, because we didn't have 4x4 capability, because we couldn't follow them into the wooded area, even though we might have seen them go into that area. I did try it once, and I broke down. It happens, but we were in Granadas with 160 litre tanks. You were very low to the ground, so you're just not built to go across country. Whereas they were in these little Isuzu Trooper. One was a hard top and one was a soft top, and they were both green, so they blended into the forest really, really well. And all they did with their number plates was, because they were yellow and red, they would cover them with mud so they couldn't be picked up at night, and they would stay out overnight sometimes.
Did they have any of the lighting like the Brixmis cars did with the James Bond switches, where they could change the lighting so it looked like a motorbike or
more than likely
anything like that?
Yeah, more than likely. But we never. It was very difficult, and really never really had a lot of contact with them at night, apart from if they were seen coming back in off the autobahn. And usually you could see they haven't cleaned their plates properly, so you knew they'd been across country, you knew they'd been hiding up somewhere. And sometimes they'd disappear for a couple of days, a couple of nights, and they'd stay out, do their whatever they were doing, gaining intelligence, and then they just reappear on the radar again. But once they disappeared, until we got a positive sighting, we couldn't do much about it, And I'm sure the Brixmis did a brilliant job. I mean, they did a lot, took a lot more risk on than we did. And the Soviets got away with a lot to a point, but they were monitored quite often. Well, not quite often, a lot, to be honest. We quite often used to see unmarked. Our intelligence groups were out a couple of times, And one of the lads said, "Oh, I know that guy who just passed us in that car. He was on the same course as me in Preston." And they because they wouldn't admit to that fact, they just keep on driving. So it's quite funny. We had those little close encounters. And when you come back off a patrol, you put a report together, and the intelligence corps would say, "Well, we need to talk to you about this report." And then the guys would come in, and you go, "Oh, I recognise you from that driving course." "No, it wasn't me." So,
wow.
Yeah, interesting.
Wow. And I mean, you mentioned that sort of SOXMIS got up to things. Obviously, they're trying to gain military intelligence, but did you, and this is probably a question for somebody who worked in the intelligence corps, but were they liaising with agents in place in West Germany and dropping off information dead drops for them and other sort of nefarious work like that?
We knew they were up to stuff, and we knew that when they sent multiple vehicles out to distract us and the decoys, the other vehicle was going off to drop something off that was going to get picked up, and that happened quite often. But whether the intelligence corps picked them up, it's possible, but not all the time. So I mean, I'm sure a lot of their stuff probably did get through. I mean, when you look at the other side on our BRICSMIS, the amount of stuff they got from the east is phenomenal. It's just incredible the amount of stuff they got. So I'm sure the SOXMIS didn't get quite as much as the BRICSMIS got, but they got what they wanted, and I'm sure to a point they were allowed to get a certain amount of information. So that the system could see that, we're not building troops, we're just maintaining troops and maintaining equipment. And that's what we really did, didn't it? We didn't really build up troops, really. In fact, if anything, as we know, things were getting less important. So things were being cut down, and the troops were being reduced.
I interviewed somebody who worked for US counterintelligence, and he was tracking SOXMIS in the American zone.
Yeah.
And they believed that they were setting up weapons caches for Spetsnaz troops, which is probably not unlikely. Or, I don't know how much, because I know that the Stasi had contact with the Baader-Meinhof terrorist group.
Yeah.
But I think the Soviets probably steered quite clear of them. But it's quite interesting talking about, potential weapons caches. I don't know whether you heard any of those stories.
Vaguely remember that kind of talk, but there's nothing that we ever came across. I mean, the Soviets in our sector weren't even armed. They might have had a penknife, but they never had any weapons. It was only us that became armed towards the end of the Cold War. So not I know of.
I was going to ask you whether you were armed. So you were armed towards the end of the Cold War because of the IRA threat?
Yeah, towards the latter part of the 80s, right about 80, end of 88, early, about 89, the threat of the IRA escalated around BFG or BAOR because of the incidents where the soldiers getting shot in Belgium and all these places. Whether they were RAF, it doesn't mean they didn't discriminate who they were. And the army guy in Zeebrugge, the army decided that we would be armed. So we both, the driver and whoever the passenger was, would be armed with a 9mm pistol with ammunition. And it was live ammunition. It wasn't dummies. It was live stuff. And we were taken to the Russians and told and shown them the weapons and said, look, we will be armed from now on. It's for your protection and our protection. And just to let you know, these are the weapons we're going to be carrying. And they were more than happy about it. More than happy. Probably felt a little bit at ease, actually.
Yeah. You mentioned the Soviets used to cover up their number plates. So they had special number plates that set them apart from other vehicles on the road.
Yeah, they stuck out like a sore thumb. These big red hammer and sickle number plates on the right corner, and the rest of the plate was yellow. It said on its Soviet military mission BAOR on the plate, and that was obvious. That stood out like a sore thumb. But when they used to go into the woods, they would just get the plates, wet them because they were aluminium, and just smear mud all over them. We saw one when we eventually picked one up. It had gone missing. These 4x4, and his plate was still a little bit dirty. They hadn't cleaned it off properly, so we knew what they'd covered it in mud, because otherwise, although it's not reflective, it is the red and yellow is very bright, and it would stand out in any forest. For all we know, they could have found a little bit of an old canvas or a little bit of a cam net that they found from the ex-troops on exercise and just covered it for the duration of their time in the forest areas. But they were they were aware. Their clothing was always dark, like green, so they would blend in very easily. And their badges weren't really shiny as such. They probably would remove them anyway, and so they would blend in very, very easily to their surroundings.
Yeah, because I think you've got one of the number plates there, haven't you?
Yeah, this is actually off the vehicle I used to follow, number 52, which was an Opel Ascona. All this stuff was supposed to have been collected and destroyed. Unfortunately, we got there before it got destroyed, so we all took little bits of memorabilia. Otherwise, it would have been lost, which would have been a shame.
Yeah, it would have been a real shame, and that's an incredible souvenir you've got there. I mean, it's like the Bricksmith guys have got those PRA signs from East Germany and things like that. Are there any of the NATO PRA signs still existing, or
there will be, but they'll be in people's personal possessions now, I'm suggesting.
Yeah. No.
Anything to do with the Cold War is going to be sought after in the future, because I know for a fact, having spoken to our military police museum, they have said they have very little Cold War memorabilia because people that are still alive are still holding on to it.
I always worry about, families not realising the historical value of some stuff. It just ending up in a skip. SOXMIS would only recognise the Royal Military Police. So under what circumstances would the West German police stop a SOXMIS car? Would it be because of a road traffic accident or something like that?
Yeah, they did have quite a few accidents. Even when I was there, they had accidents. And when they were involved with another civilian vehicle, they would just sit in their vehicle, regardless of its condition, and wait for us to get there. They would never surrender anything, nothing. And the moment the police realised it was a Russian vehicle, you could see by the number plates, they would then have to call us out, and we would then get out there as quick as we could. It was like watching firemen slipping down a pole. We'd be out that quick, because that was our job, to get to them, because we were their police force. We were there to liaise with them. The intelligence corps were not there to do that. If anything happened, whether it was a road collision or something happened with them and they've involved another German civilian in any shape or form, we were there to not necessarily take their corner, but to be there to represent them.
So they wouldn't even leave the vehicle, even if somebody had been injured in that accident?
No, they would stay with the vehicle. And if they could, they'd secure themselves inside that vehicle until we got there. And then we would then call an ambulance or deal with it. They very rarely would let the German authorities get anywhere near them. And they were very protective about what was in their vehicles, which is understandable.
And what if one of these Soviet vehicles crossed into, what would have been the American sector? Did you just turn around at that point because it was in somebody else's jurisdiction, or? No,
if you want to cross into another sector, you had to get permission. You needed written documentation, and you would be met by. If we were sending, if we had our SOXMIS going into the American sector, we would have to meet the American forces at a certain point in Bavaria, right on the edge of on the main part of Germany. So somewhere on the edge, there'll be a motorway. We would stop, or the autobahn. And we would liaise with the Americans. We would exchange niceties, exchange details of the Russian officers going into their sector, and they would have to have papers from the British liaison mission to say that they were on official duty to go down there. And then the Americans would then escort them to wherever they were going, to the Russian compound in their American sector, and vice versa. When quite often the Americans used to come into our sector, we would meet them on the edge at Bavaria. On the A7, I think it was, we'd meet there on just an isolated little parking spot. They'd come in with the Americans, they'd park up, we would check their paperwork, we would then call to double check that the details are correct and the IDs fitted the individuals, and then we would escort them all the way from the edge of Bavaria all the way to Bunda.
I mean, it's incredible that even with the formation of West Germany, there is still these sector boundaries existing from the occupation zones of World War II. I mean, they were there right the way through to 89 then. I mean, it must have really aggravated the West German police, the fact that these guys were untouchable.
Yeah, I think it probably did. And it probably riled a lot of people. But at the end of the day, that was the agreement that was signed, and that was the agreement they had to abide by, and only in the last, what was it, sort of 3 or 4 months before the Russians left former West Germany, where did the German police have control of them. There was a signal sent out in this kind of a letter form like this, came out and said, and I've got this letter here saying that with effect of a certain date. I haven't read it for such a long time, but with effect from a certain date, the British military police will no longer have jurisdiction on the Russian forces that are presently in West Germany. And henceforth, they will be using Russian number plates on their private vehicles and will become treated as a member of the local public. So if they got involved in an incident, they would be dealt with by the German police, which is rather strange because we'd had the control for so long. Suddenly the German police were given this jurisdiction, but they weren't using the yellow and red plates. They were taken off their vehicles. So they suddenly got these black and white plates, which is a normal Russian registration plate. So they became a normal member of the public. Crazy.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, did you take any pictures of the SOXMIS vehicles? Was that part of your role, or was that not?
Our job was to take as many pictures as we could with the MOD cameras that we had. But there's always a but, isn't there? Every member of the military police had their own cameras as well. So for every picture you took with the Ministry of Defence camera, you kind of took with your own camera too. So I've got back here, 1, 2, 3. There we go. 3 massive photo albums full of Russian pictures. And that, by the way, that's number 43. That's the soft-top Isuzu Trooper. So I've got 3 photo albums going from 1987 to 1988 in this one here. And these other ones go on after that.
Yeah.
which are all there in superb condition.
Well, that's, I'd love to have a leaf through that.
Yeah, you're more than welcome.
I mean, we mentioned earlier about detaining SOXMIS vehicles. Was that solely your role, or could other military units do that in certain circumstances? If
the Soviet vehicle was spotted around any military installation, their guides, the instructions were to hem it in. Put a vehicle at the front and a vehicle at the rear. Not ram the vehicle, but hem it in. There's a difference. And I've got pictures of 2 Dutch vehicles in Germany, in former West Germany, that did exactly that. There were 2 Dutch vehicles jammed in or hemmed in one of the Russian SOXMIS vehicles, and they put a cover across the top and called out the Dutch military police. Now, the Dutch military police obviously were in West Germany for a long time, but they weren't. The Russians still wouldn't take any notice of them because they only recognised the British military police, even though the Dutch were in the British sector, and the Russians were clearly spying or trying to find out intelligence on the Dutch military equipment capability and the bases they had. So then they called us out, and then we went out, and then took possession of their ID cards, and then that's when we called out the liaison officer, and then he physically escorts them out of the area once he's told them that they're in breach of the restrictions, the permanent restriction zone. And then they get basically a letter goes up to their boss and saying that they were in a restricted zone, they shouldn't be in there again, and it's just like a slap on the wrist, really. That happened. It happened regular enough, I mean, you'd be sitting in a service area, and you'd be an area where you think, well, there could be one here, there might not be one here. So you're sitting there, and suddenly some civilian would come running up to you, tap on your window like a maniac, and you wind your window down, and he'd say in German, he'd say, "SOXMIS, SOXMIS, SOXMIS, Russia, Rusky," and you'd shoot after this vehicle. It's crazy, and that happened every so often. You'd be set in an area not knowing that they're there, and suddenly a local member of the local public or a member on the autobahn would see us and go, they know straight away, British military police. They're responsible for the Russians. So we used to go, and sure enough, as soon as we got onto the motorway or the autobahn, within minutes we'd pick up this this Soviet car. Then we'd have to report in over the radio. We found number 52 heading eastbound on the A2 or wherever it was and given the location. And then we'd be told to either carry on and follow it or drop off. And if we got told to drop off, the chances were that the intelligence were in the area. They were going to take over. And then the Russians would think, okay, we're okay here. They would carry on.
Yeah, they'd think they'd outfoxed you.
Yeah.
Were there occasions where perhaps a military unit was slightly a little bit too enthusiastic about the hemming in, or not?
No, not in my time. I'm sure there were previous times where I think people got carried away. I mean, the idea when the British were in the east, I know for a fact they used to get their vehicles crushed by tracked vehicles.
Oh yeah.
They used to drive over their engine blocks and things. It became ridiculous, but we never did anything like that. I mean, I actually was on patrol and we got called to a suspected infringement of a farmer's piece of land. And as we drove into this farmer's piece of land, coming towards us was the Russian vehicle. We stopped nose to nose like that. And we did what we call a detention. And we got them out and got their ID cards and they were caught. It was wonderful. Yeah. Just one of the moments where we came together like that. And there's no way they were getting out of it because it was a narrow track. And it turned out to be one of the majors and his driver doing a naughty recce in a restricted area. So they got chastised over that one as well. That was quite a nice. When things like that happen, it was quite a nice moment. You suddenly caught them doing their naughty stuff.
Yeah. No, I can imagine catching them red-handed. Were they these Soviets? Were they GRU or what were they? Were you able to identify what sort of units they were?
We knew what they were. They were gunners, artillery officers, just drivers. A prap was like a warrant officer. There were a lot of officers, and one or two, I think 2 or 3. Yeah, when I then come to think of it, 2 or 3 of them. Occasionally, when they went out and they got lost deliberately, they were Spetsnaz, which is the special forces, and you know the difference because their ID card is red. And all the other troops have a grey, browny coloured ID card. So when you got the red one, you knew straight away they're up to something naughty because if the Spetsnaz are involved, they've gone into some intelligence because these are the people that are specialists in intelligence. And there was only 2 or 3 of those they had. But when you caught them, and ironically, the chap we caught on that farmer's field or that farmer's track was Spetsnaz. So he was, but his driver wasn't. His driver was he was a driver and he was a rifleman, like a rifleman. So they used to have private drivers, and sometimes the warrant officers would drive. The officers very rarely drove. They would always be driven, and there's a lot more officers than there was senior ranks and privates. So it was quite heavily on officers because obviously there was a political role to be in West Germany, and a huge honour if you were a driver or a lance corporal to do that job. So and sometimes they used to pose for pictures with you. And then, of course, when you're taking the pictures, they would hope that you would give them copies, but clearly it was not feasible or appropriate to give them copies of the photographs, but you had to pass them on to the int. But of course, you kept copies yourself. We all did. It was all part. It was a game, and at the end of the day, it was history in the making, and none of us ever thought the Berlin Wall would come down. And there was the one occasion where I tried to follow that 4x4 off road, and we went down into this gully, and my vehicle broke down because I think I'd knocked a solenoid out or something, and they weren't aware. And just across from us, they stopped in the same vehicle, 43. We stood there, and it was lunchtime. We were at about 12:15, and I got my little English sandwiches out, and the guy with me, he got his sandwiches out, and we had a flask of tea because we were always prepared for a long stint. So we always had at least 2 flasks of tea because we knew we'd be out for a long time. And I thought, well, we've broken down. I'm not going to tell them we've broken down. I'm just going to sit here and see what happens. And then one of the officers got out of the vehicle, and from a distance I could see him, and he waved. So I said to the guy with me, I said, you stay here. I'll go across and I'll have a chat with him. So that's when I went across. And this is when I got myself into deep water because they offered me a sandwich, which was fine. It wasn't an issue. It was a big sandwich. It was a big store-stop ham and cheese and this massive roll. But while they were making the roll, I did my rounds and walked around their vehicle, and I got the mileage, I got the condition, I could see inside it. I got so much intelligence I thought I was doing myself a favour. As it turned out, I actually got in trouble for over-familiarisation because I should never have gone over to them in the first place. But they got intelligence they would otherwise never have got. And I just got told not to be so familiar. But the sandwich was very nice. And getting the mileage off the vehicle and seeing the mud inside it and the equipment, they had shovels and stuff in there, was very interesting. And I'm sure really the intelligence were happy about that. So they used to dig themselves in and stuff when they were out and about, and they'd been doing that because you could tell by the mud inside the vehicle. So they'd been to some little place, a hideaway where they probably used to go on a regular basis. But because we didn't have 4x4s, we weren't able to follow them across country. And even that day, after I attempted to climb this sandwich and eventually inwardly digested it, my vehicle, they drove off and my vehicle wouldn't start. And no matter how much I tried, it wouldn't start. And then about half an hour after they left, the solenoid reset itself and I managed to get started and get out of the woods. But by that time, they were long gone. I'm sure they think to this day, why the hell didn't they follow us? Basically, we couldn't.
Yeah, did nobody think of equipping you guys with 4x4s?
We did ask for Range Rovers because the RAF in Gutterslow, which is only up the road from us, they had a lovely fleet of Range Rovers, and the idea was that we would give them some of our cars and we would get some of their Range Rovers, which would have been perfect, but it never came about. The idea was bashed around and considered, but never actually taken up, which was a shame, really.
Yeah, who knows what you might have found.
Yeah, unless the track was a gravel track. If it was muddy, we were stuck. The vehicles were so low to the ground. In '89, just before the Berlin Wall came down, because we got issued all these brand new Opel Senators, wonderful vehicles, 3 litre. They had the Opel badge, but they were Vauxhalls, and we got 12 of those and replaced the 12 Ford Granadas that we had, all white again. But the difference was the blue lights on the roof were a bar. And they were identical to the German ones. They were green and white with blue lights on the edges. And we had military police front and rear. And the fuel tank went from 160 litres to 145. But the actual tank they fitted in the boot was a Formula One racing fuel tank. So it was designed not to explode into the vehicle, but to implode and push out the fuel out of the way from the vehicle should there be an impact. But with the other Granadas, we had 160 litres. And it was just a steel tank, which was horrendous. But the Senators were nice vehicles. They were very, very, very good. But unfortunately, they only got about 8 months' use before the Berlin Wall came down. And then they were all sent around to the different units where they drove and crashed the damn things, which was a shame because I signed for, because I was the fleet manager or the MT sergeant for 19 Sport Platoon. I think I signed for about £1.25 million worth of vehicles and equipment when they came through. And then next thing you know, the Berlin Wall's coming down.
Incredible. You must have some other memorable stories of your time. What's the Techade story?
Yeah, the Techade. We only had like half a dozen of these telephone units, and these telephone units, what they're like a size of a shoebox, an average shoebox. And they had to be installed into the boot, but you could get into the boot through the back seat. So when we had multiple vehicles out on the ground, not everybody had these Techades, which was basically a telephone. You had the receiver in the front, which you would pick up, and you would press the buttons to dial the number, but you needed the box in the back to do the transmitting and the receiving. And we would be out probably following a Soviet car, anything between 80 to 90 miles an hour, and then your replacement would come to take over from you, and they didn't have the Techade. So whoever was driving, the other person would climb over the front seat into the back, open up the seat, disconnect this Techade unit, which meant we had no communications, and then the other guy from the other vehicle would pull alongside, so we were side by side with the back windows open, and we would pass the Techade from one vehicle to the other. You had to strategically place your vehicle, and the drivers had to be good at this because you were almost on a door mirror to door mirror when you were close doing this speed and still following the Russians. So then the other guy would then reach out and pull this thing back into their vehicle and then plug it in, and then we would just peel off and they would carry on the pursuit. That happened a few times.
So you're doing this at like 90 miles an hour?
Yeah. We became quite experts at it.
Yeah, I'd imagine you would. It sounds like something they should have had in the Royal Tournament.
Yeah, it was an experience. I only ever did it. I think I did it twice, and it was it was a bit hairy at times, but it works, and it did the job. And and when you bear in mind you've got a 160 litre tank, you can go for quite a distance on that. So. But the Soviets never knew we had extended fuel tanks, but I'm sure they had an idea because we just were always with them. When we needed to be with them, we were there, So, and we used to have sheets and sheets and sheets, books of fuel coupons, and you'd go to a petrol station anywhere in Germany. If it was a Shell or a BP or an Esso, you'd go in and you'd fill up one tank, and then you'd pull it out and fill up the second tank, because the other tank used to automatically feed into the second tank, and you'd put in maybe 140 litres, and a guy would come out and he'd look under the car and he'd say, "Where's the camera? Where's it all going?" And you go, it all fits. Trust me, it fits. And they used to say, they look around, is this a wind up? Is there a camera? Is we on candid camera or something? And they say, no, we've put in 132 litres, but here's 140. And they thought, oh, okay, thank you, and then they did away. And then after that, in the 90s, they did away with the fuel coupons, and you got like a swiping debit card type thing now. But we used to have massive books. We used to carry something like 1,000 litres of fuel cards in our vehicle, in our glove box, so we just tank up randomly. It must have cost the MOD an absolute fortune.
Wow. But
it was good times.
And are there any other detention stories that you've got that we've not covered?
We had so many, actually, but I think one of the funniest ones was just as the Cold War was declared to be finished, we were following one of the Russian vehicles. In fact, it was 43 again, funnily enough, and they left the Autobahn and drove into a military installation area, and we followed them off on the road, and the guy was me, a guy called Mick Carr. He said, "They've just driven off a road into a military installation." I said, "Yeah, they have, haven't they?" And it kind of took us a few seconds to realise that they'd done it, and then we realised it was a complete and utter map reading error on their behalf, and we stopped and we detained them and had to go through all the paraphernalia, even though we knew it was a map reading error. So things like that happened as well. They even had to. Not often, but they had a couple of crashes near Hanover, near Garbsen, where they on the snow. They had a couple of damaged vehicles there, as we were called out to, and because we used to have winter tyres in Germany, it was law to have winter tyres, so we'd have to get our tyres on to go out and to deal with it and pick up the pieces, because they wouldn't move their vehicles until we got there. So quite often you'd go to an incident and it could have been cleared, but they wouldn't clear it because the Russians wouldn't allow it. So there's so many little incidents like that all over the place.
Where were you when you heard that the Berlin Wall had opened?
I was actually in the ops room in 19th Platoon, and because I was there. There was the guy Malcolm I talked about, who took me on the white mask course. I only talked to him a few days before that, and I said, there's probably the Berlin Wall's going to come down. He said, no, it's never going to come down. It can't. This Cold War's going to go on forever. It just won't happen. And then it was like literally overnight, the Berlin Wall's come down, and it was all over the news, and we were all on standby. And then suddenly we were no longer on standby because the Berlin Wall came down, and our whole job description completely changed overnight. Instead of following them, we were now looking after them in more in the security role, because they were still going out and do their patrols. But it wasn't like it was, because they were going back. So the intelligence they were going to get now wasn't as worthy as it would have been when the tension was different. So it was a really interesting time for everybody, and none of us knew what was going on. And then I say all these messages came out. Like this one. This is the original transcript from the old ComSend, saying the 2nd of October 1990, in accordance with the Robertson and Mellon Agreement Act of 1946, are to be withdrawn from SOXMIS by October 1990. Then mustered account on United Individuals items, SOXMIS number plates, etc., held by any liaison mission in 19th Platoon must be accounted for. So that's the letter that came out, which I've got. That's it. That's the original, saying that everything is to be accounted for, and they're no longer on a mission. The mission is cancelled, but they were still going out and doing patrols.
Yeah.
Still gaining intelligence.
Wow.
And we were still doing that. And we went down from 12 potential patrol vehicles. We went down to 2 overnight.
When you heard that news, you must have thought, flipping out, this is my job disappearing.
Oh, we all did. We all did. We all thought, wow, this is history in the making. Because the Berlin Wall was never meant to come down. It was meant to be. They were meant to ease the restrictions of the people coming from the east to the west and vice versa. But unfortunately, the people got it in their mind that the barriers were coming down. So what they do, they all gathered at the barriers and forced the barriers down. And then the Berlin Wall was breached, and that was no going back. But we kept going. We didn't actually finish until the latter part of the 90s, early 91, when it finally the compound closed down. But by that time, we'd had just little issues. Our job was curtailed suddenly overnight. The wall was down. We still controlled the Russians. We still were their police force, and they were still going out, and we were still putting patrols out, but as a token gesture, because there was nothing more to be said, because all this information came out saying that they were no longer to be covered as SOXMIS patrols.
So were you able to be friendlier with them at that point?
No, it stayed the same.
Or was it still
the same?
It was still by the book.
Yeah. I mean, I was one of the few that would actually talk to them, because they would speak German, but as I said to you, they would not speak English. They very rarely, I've never heard them ever speak English. Before the Berlin Wall came down, they would quite often have functions at Bunda in their compound, and our job then became a security guard. So we would patrol their compound to make sure they weren't hassled by any local thugs and things. And they used to come out, and through the fence they would pass us sandwiches and lots and lots and lots of vodka. And we would they would give us these little goblets of vodka like this, and we would open our flask and pour it into the flask. So when you left in the end of an evening, you probably have 2 flasks full, because the Russians love their vodka. And of course you then take that vodka home, and it was good stuff. But although they used to buy it from the NAFI, they never said that. Just before the Berlin Wall was announced, we were at Belsen. And it was a proper official Memorial Day. And Major was then Lieutenant Colonel Nipko, came out of the memorial service, and the British liaison officer was there. And I've got all these pictures. And Major Nipko would just been promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, took his hat off, and this is his hat that he threw, and I caught it. And inside this hat, it says Major Nipko, 1988. That's his little head inside this hat, and I kept that, and I thought he expected me to throw my berry back, and I couldn't, because I would have been properly dressed. So I kept my berry, but I also kept this. So this really was at the end.
That is an incredible piece. That definitely should be in the Army Museum. That
and then
incredible.
Then we got invited down to Bunda, because obviously the Russians had packed up. They were ready to go for their last farewell, and only 3 of us could go. There was myself, a guy called Des Webster, who was a corporal, and Bernie Virgin, MBE. He was the warrant officer in charge of the platoon. Now Bernie said he didn't want to drink much. I said, well, either way, you have a drink, because you're the senior here. You can have a drink. I'll drive your vehicle, and Des can really socialise with the Russians. So it was the best decision I ever made, because I was drinking orange juice. Bernie had a little bit of vodka with some orange juice, and Des was drinking a tumbler like this, full of vodka, pure vodka. He had three glasses of this stuff, and he was completely paralytic. And the 4 Russians picked him up and took him up and laid him on the bed for about 2 hours while we carried on with the festivities downstairs. All the rest of the platoon by this time had all dissolved. They'd all gone. There was just the 3 of us left. And then we had bits of food and things. It was the conversation was going well. And then of course it was time to go. The British liaison officer was there. There was quite a few people there, and then we had to get Des. So the Russians picked up Des, carried him down, and put him in the back of of Bernie's Volvo, which happened to be brand new. He only picked it up the day before, and because Des was rather worse for wear, he was a bit messy in the back of the car, so it didn't go down well. And then we had to get Des on to his wife, who was known to be quite feisty, to say the least. And I said to Bernie, I said, right, Bernie, this is what we have to do. We take him up onto the 4th floor of this block where he lives. We put him at the front door to his home, and we ring the doorbell and we leave quickly, because if you otherwise you're going to get dragged into the argument of him being in the state he's in. So I said, whatever you do, you keep the lift open, and I'll prop him up and I'll ring the doorbell. So we got up to the floor and we propped him against the door. Bernie kept the lift door open, and I pressed the doorbell. And as he started sliding down the door to his apartment, I heard his wife shouting, "Is that you, Des? What time do you call this?" And really going on one. And I'd run to the lift, and as the lift door shut, I heard their door open. And what time you got? Look at the state of you and everybody else. And of course we got away and everything was fine. And the next day he came in and he looked really rough. And I said, "You look really rough. Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah." He said, where I fell, when she opened the door and I fell in, that's where she left me all night. She just threw a blanket over me." So he was in the doghouse for a while. But sadly, the memories of that day are only with me now, because Bernie Virgin died. Bless him, a really nice guy. He died a couple of years ago, and Des also died a few years ago. So all the only members of the platoon that went, I'm the only one surviving, which is really, really sad, because Des was younger than me. He got cancer, and Bernie went into hospital for an operation and didn't come out. So they're both passed, which is sad.
Yeah, no, that is. But I guess we've immortalised their story now.
Des was a fantastic driver, unbelievable driver, really super guy. And Bernie was just an awesome gentleman, a real gentleman, and he deserved the MBE. I never knew what he got the MBE for, actually, but I do know he got the MBE, and I believe it was to do with the work he did with the Russians and stuff within the platoon. But really, two awesome people, which is nice. Proud to have served with them guys. But life goes on, and then the next thing you know, the Russians are going back, and they no longer have the number plates because I've got them.
Yeah.
And then I end up with the last duty is to escort them down to Rheindarlen, which is the British headquarters there, to receive their marching orders. And then they were in there for I think about an hour or less, with coffees and chats with the British liaison officer and everything else. I've got all the newspaper clippings here from that day as well. I've got those. And then they came out, and I waited for them. Colonel Trunov was the chief officer, colonel. They were in his Opel Senator, a dark blue thing. It was much older than ours. And we escorted them out of the base of Rheindarlen. We got onto, I think it was the 57, and we got to the first service area. And by this time, I said they had the Russian black and white number plates on their vehicles. And the driver was a private, and the colonel was in the back. He got out, and he spoke Russian to his driver, and his driver said to us, the colonel wishes you all the very best for the future, and hopes you don't find yourselves unemployed for too long. And I said I wish the same to him in German. It's all in German, so we wish him all the very best, and we saluted each other. And that was the end of the Cold War. And then they drove off. That was them on the way back to the east.
And we have further information such as videos and links in our show notes, which will show as a link in your podcast app. Now, this show wouldn't exist without our generous Patreons, so I want to thank one and all of them for their support. You can very easily become a Patreon by going to coldwarconversations.com/donate. If you can't wait for the next episode, please visit our Facebook discussion group, where listeners just like you continue the Cold War conversation. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thank you very much for listening. It is really appreciated. Goodbye.